Well, good morning. I admittedly, as I was getting ready for this sermon this week, I was thinking that I am not much of a romantic comedy movie kind of guy. My wife used the term rom-com, and I had no idea what she was even talking about. I thought that was like a convention downtown or something. I was like, what in the world is going on? But the one that I do like, and I watch every time it comes on, is Groundhog Day. I love Groundhog Day. I mean, I love that groundhog driving the truck and all that. If you're not familiar with the movie, Bill Murray wakes up basically every day on Groundhog Day, and he keeps reliving the same day over and over and over and over and over again. And through the process, he falls in love with Andie MacDowell, the gal in the movie. And when they finally get to that moment where he goes to express his love, listen to what he says. Because she makes this comment like, well, you don't know me. And he says, you like boats, but not the ocean. You go to a lake in the summer with your family up in the mountains. There's a long wooden dock and a boathouse with boards missing from the roof, and a place used to crawl underneath to be alone. You're a sucker for French poetry and rhinestones. You're very generous. You're kind to strangers and children. And when you stand in the snow, you look like an angel. And it's one of those that I hear stuff like that, and I'm like, man, I really stink at this. But the point here is he didn't tell her that he loved her. It's that he knew her so well that he was able to express that by saying, what he knew about her. And that's kind of the heart of Psalm 63 as we get into that today. It's this fantastic psalm of worship and praise, but it operates not out of a general, just, I love you, God. But he's so close to God that it just pours out. Here's why this is so incredibly important. Don't miss this. Scripture talks about a time, Jesus mentions it in Matthew 7, verses 22 and 23. He said, there will be a day when you're going to come, many are going to come, and they're going to say, Lord, Lord. And didn't I do this, and didn't I go to church, and didn't I do this, and didn't I do this stuff in your name? And he's going to say, I don't know you. Go away. That text haunts me. That text haunts me because I feel oftentimes as I know God and I want to be close to Him and I want to worship, and I read that and I go, man, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to ever get close to God and Him say, I don't know you. I want to be that when I'm hitting the finish line, I'm picking up speed. And not just in works, but because I know Him better and I love Him more and I want to be closer and closer. And so as we enter Psalm 63 today, we're going to enter a text where you see the psalm writer David, he knows God. He knows God, and it's sort of like that Bill Murray and Andie MacDowell deal. It just pours out of him, not a simple, I love you, God, or yes, I ought to go to church or anything like that. Worship flows from him based on their relationship, and the relationship is based on God's love for him. So from that, we see it all come out. Psalm 63. I'm going to read the first 8 verses because honestly I'm going to stop there because if we don't, there's no way I'm getting through this today. God, you are my God. I eagerly seek you. I thirst for you. My body faints for you in a land that is dry, desolate, and without water. So I gaze on you in the sanctuary to see your strength and your glory. My lips will glorify you because your faithful love is better than life. So I'll bless you as long as I live. At your name, I'll lift up my hands. You satisfy me with rich food. My mouth will praise you with joyful lips. When I think of you as I lie on my bed, I meditate on you during the night watches because you're my helper. I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings. I follow close to you. Your right hand holds on to me. See, this is the writing of someone who knows God and enjoys their time together and is, honestly, he's obsessed with God. So as we look at this text today, I'm just going to pull out 4 truths about God that lead to thriving worship. 4 truths about God that will lead to thriving worship. And the first one is this: when you see God's love clearly, He becomes consuming. David says, I'm going to worship you because your love is better than life. It's better than life, he says. And when I read that, I go, man, do I really believe that? Do I get that? Not just in my head, but in my heart, that God, your love it's better than air. It's better than everything. The New Testament has a corollary to this. Paul says to live as Christ and to die as gain. Paul's at that point near the end of his life, and he's like, hey, if God wants me to keep on living, I'm going to keep working for Him. But if it's time for me to go home, man, that's even better. That's even better because I get to be with Him. You see, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like when we see God clearly and we get just a taste of how He feels about us and how much He loves us. I love David. He says, I think about you when I wake up at night. In other words, when I've got insomnia, God, I start thinking about you. And during the night watches, so they would have security guards at different points during the night. So during the night, I had an opportunity a couple years ago to visit Israel. And we did this exercise where we went out and stayed in a Bedouin camp. So we went and stayed in the tents of the Bedouins way out in the Judean wilderness where this would have been written. So when you get out there, I mean, there's no cities around. As a matter of fact, there's not trees, there's not anything. It's sand and hills and dry. It's just that part of Israel, the southern part of Israel, looks like that. And David's like, man, I thirst for you in a dry land. He said, when I'm in the night watch, when I think about you, and I can remember this just having this incredible impact on me. Whenever you get away, have you ever been away from somewhere where there's not any street lights and there's not a town real close by? Suddenly the sky is a whole lot bigger and a whole lot brighter. And there's not 50 stars out there, there's 50 billion. And they're everywhere. And you look up there and you're like, man, God made all that. God made all of that. And He takes time to love me. God made all of those stars, and He made the Himalayan mountains, and He made camels, and He made giraffes, and He made a billion daisies, and He made everything that is good and wonderful, and He takes time to love the likes of me, and for that matter, you. That just blows me away. In spite of my hypocrisy, anger, jealousy, struggles, all that stuff that we lock in here that we hope doesn't ooze out. In spite of all of that, He loves us. He looks at all that and says, you're mine. And this is the third week in a row, third psalm in a row, He's used this word faithful love. We've talked about this, Hebrew, hesed. This idea of, I love you with everything that I am, and I'm not going anywhere. When it gets tough, I'm not leaving. In the foxhole, it's I'm not going anywhere. I'm here with you to the end. That's the kind of love that He mentions that God has. He says, your love, your faithful love, God, your hesed is better than life. And I wonder, how often do we even get a glimpse of that? You realize when I just keep it at this basic level, I'm going to go and hang out at church for a bit because it seems like the right thing to do, and I'll sing along because it's kind of snappy. I'm missing all of this. All of this. This that David says, it's better than life. Because when you get that, when you get this basic truth that we teach kids, for God so loved the world. He loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, that anyone that would believe in him wouldn't perish, but would have everlasting life. That's the way that God feels about you on your worst day. Not when you go, man, if I get this in order, and I get this in order, and I get this in order, and I get this done. No. He doesn't love who you might be. He loves who you are. He loves who you are. You see, when you get that, when you start to get this, he becomes consuming. The second truth is this. When you see God's love clearly, worship becomes a delight, not a duty. Amen. See, when we get that, he becomes consuming, and suddenly it's not me going to church or signing up to serve or putting something in the plate because it's the right thing to do. It takes on a whole nother level at that point. It becomes natural to worship. It becomes natural. It becomes driven, because genuine love is always driven by passion. It's never driven by duty. So Valentine's Day. The other day, I know my wife likes to cook, so I took her up to this place. And honestly, I just saw it on TV. I'm not very creative in this sort of stuff, so I just find other good ideas and steal them. So I took her up to this place in Broad Ripple on Valentine's Day where they make, I don't even know what you call it. They make stuff. They make food there. They make desserts is what it is, and there's chefs there, and they're doing all this, and we got to sit and watch, and it was just kind of a neat time with just her and I to hang out there. And she's like, hey, thanks for this. Thanks for this time together. Thanks for this day. I could have responded like this. Well, seemed like the right thing to do. But I can tell you for about a bazillion reasons I didn't respond that way. And first and foremost is this, is love is never driven by duty. Love is always driven by passion. When you get that, it's not just the right thing to do, worship becomes something natural, and worship becomes something that's fantastic. There were a few of you here that were with me, and forgive me for just being blunt on this. A few years ago, I got asked to speak at a men's event. Oddly enough, they never asked me again. But I went to this men's event. And I'm not going to lie, I dig men's events where you got all these big, deep voices singing. It's fantastic. And they're singing these old, great songs of the faith, those songs that I grew up singing. And I'm excited about it. And all of a sudden, we just start mumbling great truths. And it broke my heart. Because I'm sitting here thinking, and honestly, it's the only time in my life I've almost thrown my sermon away right there and said, no, we're going to have a different chat. Because if the stuff that we sing, if we believe that it's true, it ain't about mumbling. That's not worship. That's just going through the motions. And you know what? God deserved better, and our hearts deserve better. Our hearts deserve better, because this is blah, 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 blah. No. If I get who He is and how much He loves me in spite of the mess that I've made in my life, oh man, song and worship is the natural response. Passionate, genuine worship. And I loved that Eric said he was nervous up here. Honestly, because coming to God is not something you do casually. That's right. It's not something that you're flippant about. I mean, I get it. I sweat every Sunday before I come up here. You'll go outside, have a little panic attack, come up here and say, God, I am not worthy to do this. You better take this and do something with it, because I'm about to fall down. Passionate, genuine worship is glorifying to God first. it's satisfying to the soul. Second, because have you ever noticed that God instructs singing a lot? He instructs worship. He's like, no, I'm jealous for you to have this. And you read that and you go, does God have an ego problem? Hey, let's be honest. You read that and you're like, why is he all about this? And here's why. It's because you and I are made for that. We're made for worship, and our highest experiences come when we're close to him. Man, we just, baseball just got started, and I'm just a baseball nerd, I'm not going to lie. But when I hear that catcher's mitt snap, when a fastball comes in there, I think, man, that's what that catcher's mitt was made for. It's doing what it was made to do right now. The knock of a home run, I'm like, man, that bat is doing what it's supposed to do. When you and I engage in worship, we're doing what we were made for. We're doing what we were made for, and that is not only glorifying to God, it's not only satisfying to the soul, but here it's magnetic to others. Because I'm going to tell you every Sunday, we tend to think that the worship experience or the gathering of the church is simply for us. You don't know the stories, and you don't know the baggage and the backstory that so many people come in here. So many people come and they go, I'm not sure that I'm going to be accepted. I'm not sure that I'm not going to be judged right now. I don't know what's going to happen here. But when they get that our faith is real, we're showing them something otherworldly. And when we respond without judgment, but with love and without condemnation, hey, can you believe that person wore this to church? No. Come sit by me. See, that's something otherworldly. That's something completely different. And I'm going to take this a step further. Hey, parents and new grandparents, and if you got a young person in your life, say anybody, don't export the spiritual development of your kids or your grandkids or young people in your life to someone else. I am so thankful for the S-worthies here who are coming along to help like with youth, and we're going to be praying later for the right person to be coming for the kids ministry. I love that. Their job is to come alongside what you're doing. Their job is to come alongside and echo the truth that you're showing at home. And they get, if you get an hour a week and maybe 45 to 50 hours a year, think about how much time those young people have in your life. Let them see that worship is real. And not through the sermon you give, but through the story your life tells. Through the way that you engage in worship, the way that you take this seriously. I had a Catholic girlfriend in high school, so I was forced to become a Notre Dame fan. She and I clearly didn't make it, but me and Notre Dame stuck. I've been a Notre Dame fan ever since. I had a chance, I got some tickets, and so I took a buddy of mine who I know is just nuts about Notre Dame. And I took him up, and for the first time, and I don't know if you've ever seen a Notre Dame game, but there at the end you see those gold helmets go up to the way. I look over at Dan. Not Dan S-worthy, by the way. I don't want anybody to come up saying this to him afterwards, but this other friend of mine, Dan. And man, this dude's got goosebumps. He's like, it's happening. And they come running out, and people are singing the Notre Dame fight song, and I look over, and this guy's got a tear in his eyes. He's tearing up, and he's just exploding, and I look over, I go, that's what it's supposed to look like when we approach God. That's right. That's what it's supposed to look like. That's what worship looks like. And I wonder how often I've sat to the side and kind of mumbled my way through, really thought about 10,000 other things. Third thing, when you see God's love clearly, you love the giver more than the gifts. Amen. When you see God's love clearly, you'll love the giver more than the gifts. I made a terrible decision a couple of weeks ago, like trying to eat healthy and trying to make sure that I'm changing my diet a little bit. And I told Tracy, I said, I'm gonna grill some chicken, and I hear quinoa. I don't even know what quinoa is. I said, I hear this stuff is pretty healthy. Would you make some of that and we'll do it with the chicken? And she's like, you sure you want me to do that? Because she knows I've got a constant craving for hot wings. And so I said, yeah, let's eat healthy tonight. Let's do this. And so I grill the chicken, and she's made this quinoa, which I don't know how to spell, don't know what it is, don't know where it's from or anything, but somehow she's got it in the house. And so she produces it, and we start eating it, and pretty soon Jake and I are eyeing each other. This isn't what I thought I was signing up for. Because this reminds me of that stuff that you sprinkle around the house to keep the spiders out.
Maybe it was.
It may have been. I say that. David, when he talks about God's love, he says, you give me the richest of food. As a matter of fact, actually, in the original language, he says, you give me the fat food. You give me the food with the fat on it. You give me a T-bone with a side of a Twinkie. So you give me food that I want, is what he's talking about. God, he's saying, God, you give me everything that is good. Man, and I think about just the way that God has provided in our lives. Not only salvation and freedom from sin, but His presence in our family, in this church family, and over and over and over and over. And I think, God, you've been so incredibly good to us. Here's the danger with that, though. If we're not careful, we'll begin to prioritize the gifts over the giver. And we're all about what God can give us rather than God Himself. And I'm going to tell you this. When we do that, those things like our family and those gifts in the church or anything else can turn into idolatry. No, when we see His love clearly, we realize it's Him that we're chasing. It's Him that's chased us. He's the prize. The rest of it are gifts from Him. And here's why that's so incredibly important. I think, honestly, I'll just be honest, my family in this church, what I love more than anything. You know, I mean, I just do. I love this church, and I love my family. I love my wife, my kids, my parents. But they have to be second to God. Not in theory, but in reality. Here's why that's so important. Is because I'll be the best husband I can be when I put God first. Amen. When He's first, I see my wife in a new vision. I see her for who she is, as belonging to Him. Amen. When I put God first, I see my kids different. Suddenly they're a gift from Him on the worst days. And if you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Parenting is the most wonderful and most humiliating thing you will ever do. When I put God first, I'll love Thrive Church the best. He has to be first in everything. And when He is first in everything, everything else works out. Parents, I'm going to push on this. Parents, you put God first and you'll be the best. But the best thing you can do for your kids is to love God more. That's right. Because the better you love God, the more you will. Hey, spouses, the best thing you can do for your marriage is to love God more. Because that'll change everything. Hey, single folks, and I say this, I want to say this carefully because I got married when I was like 12 years old. So I don't know how old it was, but it was entirely too young. But I haven't experienced some of the life cycles that go along there, but I know this: whether or not a relationship is in your future, and that the very best thing you can do to prepare yourself for the very best thing that you can do for who you are right now is to love God more. Because He'll take care of the rest of that. In other words, the very best thing that we can do is to love God and to Here's why. Let me back up. Here's why that's so important. When I put God first, He reorients my heart and my mind and everything else to Him and His ways.
Yes, amen.
That's why that's so incredibly important. One of my favorite preachers is a guy named Ray Ortlund. Ray Ortlund is like the Yoda of preachers. I mean, he really is. And Ray's dad was a preacher as well, and he was in his generation. He was like the Yoda of preachers back then. And Ray was out of town. He was in Ireland preaching when his dad suddenly, I believe he had a stroke, and he passed within a day or so. I mean, there was simply no time for Ray to get home to be near his dad when that was happening. So the rest of the family had gathered around, and the rest of the family was, saying goodbye and singing. And the last thing that his dad said, and this as a preacher and someone who does love God, this always strikes me because he said, "Tell Ray, ministry is not everything. Jesus is." We have to get this. If we want everything else in our lives to flow from that, we get that God has to be first. Fourth thing, when you see God clearly, wilderness experiences become worship experiences. Psalm 63 is set out in the Judean wilderness, and we know that it's written by David, and honestly, there's several accounts in David's life where we see him having to take off to the hills because somebody's trying to kill him. There's when he's running from Saul, we see that, and there's a lot of scholars who say this is written in this time. Later, it's when he's running from his own son. Whatever the case is, it reminds me that there are so many different experiences in life and so many different opportunities where things change and come and go, but God, when God is first, those wilderness experiences become worship experiences. You may not be on the run. You may not be dealing with the things that he has. But here's the deal. We do face those experiences, don't we? They come through marriage struggles and financial struggles and kids and school or whatever else that it is. But I'm here to tell you, when you know God's love for what it is, those times can be times filled with worship that will bring you through. I read it was kind of a Christian bumper sticker not too long ago. I'm never a fan of Christian bumper stickers, but because it's always an opportunity for cliche and bad theology, and that really doesn't help anybody. And it said something to the effect of, when you're filled with joy, sing, and when you're filled with sadness, pray. And I thought about it, and go, okay, that wasn't very deep. But it hit me, that's completely backwards. When you're filled with sadness and your life is filled with difficulties, that's the time to sing. When you're filled with joy, that's the time to pray. And here's why. As we sing, sometimes it reminds us of God's love, and it reminds us of who He is and what He's done, and He'll take those acts of submission. As the saying, you got to fake it till you make it. When you start bringing that to God, and God, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I trust you. God, I'm in a difficult spot, but I trust you. He does a work in our lives through those times. And honestly, Christian history is filled. It is the accounts of folks going through difficulties and singing the praises of Jesus as they go through that. Right? The early persecutions, we know this, church history, when it was getting really bad and they were trying to forcibly force out Christianity, we sang and we worshiped. And what's the author of Hebrews say about him? He said the world wasn't even worthy of those folks. African American Christians in slavery sang songs of hope to remind them of who God was and who God is. And that gave them life. And so many people, you think about how the way that when that happens, it blesses other people. Not only reminds us of who God is, but it blesses others as well. There was a blues singer, went by the name Georgia Tom. Georgia Tom, I love that. Where's Eric? I know he's into this if it's a blues singer. Georgia Tom became a Christian. His real name was Tommy Dorsey. And he became a Christian, and he was in St. Louis at a revival type thing, and he's singing and playing. And someone literally brought a note on stage to him in the middle of the singing, because his wife was about to give birth, and said, "Your wife didn't make it. She died in childbirth." I don't know who in the world thought that was a good idea, but they got him back home, and honestly, the child didn't make it either. I mean, it's just one of those terrible stories, but in that pain, he chose to worship, and in that pain, he put it on paper. And it went, those of you who are my age and older, you'll know this song, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." You see, worship came out even of difficulty, and a difficulty provided an opportunity for worship that not only brought him through that, but how many others have been blessed through that through the years, because God is always working out good for those who love Him and are called according to His purposes. Amen. Always. I don't care what you're going through right now. That's true. When we know God's love, when we know God's love, when we see God's love clearly, He becomes consuming. When we see Him clearly, worship becomes a delight, not a duty. When we see Him clearly, we love the giver more than the gifts. And when we see Him clearly, wilderness experiences become worship experiences. And I've got to ask this, because so often you and I just go through life and we go through church and we say, yeah, you know, I'm this, or I accepted Jesus. Like I needed to accept Him. Do you know Him and know His love? Because when you do, it changes everything. I don't know what you're going through, but I know this, that God's the answer. And I know this, here in a minute, we're going to stand and we're going to sing. Let His love fill you. And let His love drive you. And it may drive you in a couple of directions. It may be that you need to stop holding back and you need to give your life to Him. And it may be that those areas of your life where you're like, man, I'm just doing church and I'm just going through church, we cut that out. I mean, honestly, we're a church plant. We're not going to be all that polished. Heck, I didn't even have batteries in my kit here a little bit ago. So you don't have to apologize if you walk out and be like, hey, I need to talk to somebody about something. I'd love to come alongside, just pray with you. When we come to communion this week, we've got to do it a little differently this week, but when we come to communion, don't just go through the motions. Communion is truth that you can taste. It is a picture of God's love and His gift. This communion is God saying, let me show you how much I love you.
Yes, sir.
And you take that bread and you remember that He lived a life that you and I would flat out refuse to live. And we take that cup and we remember that came at a price. Let's pause for a minute. And just let God's word soak into you, I'll close us in prayer. And then we're going to sing, because He's worth it.